Thank you very much for inviting me. I normally start out by saying, may you never be on my show. So, it's probably not a good thing if you are. But it's an honor to be here. I guess everybody tells you that. This is a great, great university. I was here back in 1999 and survived, so I agreed to come back. I thought when I talked, I'm just going to talk a little bit today, and then we'll open it up to questions, discussion, debate, whatever you'd like to do. Normally when I go out and speak, whether it's at campuses or do interviews, with the crazy show that I do, and let's be honest, it's stupid. But it's been stupid for 23 years now, and I'm always asked questions relating to the issues of, did this cause the downfall of Western civilization? Is this the destruction of our culture? The answer to the first question, of course, as to whether I brought about the destruction of Western civilization, well, we've been around for 1,000 years, so it's time to give Eastern civilization a shot. But I don't think I can take the credit for that, or even the guilt for it. Our television show, as absurd as it is a reflection of one element of our culture. And let me just say, when I'm talking about our culture, I'm not just talking about America. I was born in London, and frankly, I don't see much of a difference between America and England other than the accent. We all listen to the same music, go to the same movies, have the same questions about when we're young, what our careers are going to be like, who we're dating, all that kind of stuff. In fact, I think in terms of distinguishing what goes on in Great Britain versus what goes on in America, there is a greater difference between the wealthy versus the not so wealthy than there is in both societies, than there is between the British and the Americans. In other words, wealthy people in England and America have more in common than wealthy people in either country do with the lower income people. That's what I've noticed. And there is a sense of elitism that runs through both societies, that we tend to look down on people of less wealth as if not being rich is their fault. And this elitism, if there's any way to defend the ridiculousness of our show, the reason I defend it is because I find that most of the criticism is based on the view that if you show lower income people on television, somehow that's trash. And wealthy people or celebrities can talk about the exact same issues, and we can't get enough of it. And we buy the magazines to hear all about it and read books about them and go to their movies and watch them on television. We love that stuff. It fills our newspapers every day talking about what celebrities are doing, what the wealthy and powerful are doing. We love that. But somehow we never seem to call them trash. But if it's a person of low income, we give them that name and we dismiss it. Societies, our cultures, our societies are not deteriorating. There is nothing, actually nothing that has ever been on any of these talk shows that has not existed in our culture for at least the last 3,000 years. There is nothing that you could ever put on any one of our television shows that has not taken place in the Bible, that has not taken place in literature, that has not taken place in Shakespeare's great works. All of this behavior has always existed. The only difference is where 3,000 years ago, we are social beings, okay? We're social beings. That's what distinguishes us from animals. And as social beings, we are always talking among each other about what other people are doing. Whether you want to call it gossip, just plain interest, or whatever. You could be a distinguished English professor here at Oxford. And if that professor comes home one night and finds his wife in bed with the next door neighbor, I promise you that English professor does not say, "Forsooth, my dear, what is it that I have found?" He would say, "Get the F out of here," and start throwing things, screaming, yelling, and behaving exactly as the people on our shows do. So who are we kidding? Okay? So this behavior always has existed, and it exists regardless of the income level. It's just that people of wealth and fame, perhaps their language is better. Perhaps they did better in the gene pool of parents. They had better luck. And maybe they were lucky to be born with a better brain. Or they were just luckier. 99.9% of what any of us become is luck. I'm not suggesting that you don't work hard or that you won't work hard in your lives. But let's be honest, I don't care how smart you are. If you were born in Ethiopia, you could be dead by the age of 5. Not one person in this august institution had anything to do with the decision to be born, to whom you'd be born, with what brain you'd be born, in what era you'd be born, in what country you'd be born. In other words, everything about our existence we had nothing to do with. So please never be in the position of saying, "Well, I earned this. This is mine. I'm responsible for how well I did in life." I'm not saying you don't work hard, but the guy who picks up the garbage works hard too. Just because you're going to have a job where you're able to say to your assistant, "Could you make this reservation for me? Could you get that car for me? Could you take care of this?" You know, that's luck. We lucked out. Let's be honest, who are we kidding? You know, when you're sitting alone in your room, don't just say to yourself, "Oh, God, man, did I luck out? Thank God I'm smart. Thanks God I had a decent brain and I can get to an institution like this." We cannot look down on the people on these television shows. There is nothing, as I said, that happens on these shows that hasn't existed in our world forever. When I do an interview with a journalist, and a journalist, you know, from these, let's say, great newspapers you have here in England, you know, and they say, "Well, how can you do that?" All I do is say, take a look at the first 3 pages in your newspaper. Any newspaper in the world, by the time you get to page 3, I've got 20 shows. It's all there. What has happened is people have always, as I said 3,000 years ago, talked, since we're social beings, about what's going on in our neighborhood. The only thing that has changed is technology. And technology has now permitted our neighborhood to become global. Where we used to just be able in the marketplace to talk about what's going on next door or in our village is now the world. And so now whatever happens anywhere, we can all talk about and wonder about. You worry about privacy? More is revealed in your Facebook about your life than will ever be revealed on a television show. What are we complaining about? What are we talking about? Our society isn't deteriorating. It's just now all of a sudden everything is known, and we'll have to adjust to that. All of a sudden, some things that we used to think were scandalous will now get to recognize that it was hypocrisy to be outraged by it, because it goes on with everything. These idols that we create, we suddenly realize they're human beings. Our political leaders, which we always used to say, well, they're statues. So they're godlike. We can't say anything badly about them. Well, now we suddenly see their private lives. And oh my gosh, they're like everybody else. I'm not saying that bad behavior should be excused or we shouldn't try to improve it. I'm just saying please don't believe that because people have less income, or they're less educated than you, or their language isn't as good, that therefore they are morally inferior. That just isn't true. And I think a lot of the critique of modern day television, for example, is just hypocrisy. What about the issue of exploitation? Oh, we're exploiting these people of lower income. Really? I used to exploit people, but that's because I was a journalist. I anchored the news and was a managing news editor doing our news in Cincinnati for the NBC affiliate there in Cincinnati, Ohio. And like every other news department, every day, I did it for 10 years, I would put the best stories I could get. That's what we'd lead the news with. And now, in hindsight, I recognize that I can't remember a situation, and I trust it never happens in any newsroom in the world. Never does a news department or newspaper ever say, let's not run this story if the person we're writing about won't like it, if it would hurt their marriage or hurt their business, hurt their career, embarrass them in front of their children or their neighbors. Do you think a newspaper ever says we won't run this story without the permission of the person we're writing about? Of course not. You'd be laughed out of the newsroom. And yet, isn't that exploitation? Newspapers and television stations and magazines are making a living on reporting on what people do that is bad, or what they think is bad. Now, you go to the silly television shows we have, let's say our show, it's purely voluntary. You choose, you have to call our show to be on it. It's not the kind of show you could recruit people. Trust me, I can't call you up and say, hey, I'd like to be on the Jerry Springer Show, it's going to be great. No, the only way you get on these shows is you have to call to ask to be on. And then once you're on, you get to choose what you're going to talk about. You get to choose what you don't want to talk about. If they're going to be surprises, you're given a list of 21 possible surprises that could happen in the show, and you have to agree to every one of those 21 possibilities before you're on. You don't know which of the 21 it'll be, but you have to have agreed to every one of them in case it is one of those. So you then can't ever say, well, I wouldn't have gone on the show if you would have said that my girlfriend's really a guy. So that's the exact opposite of exploitation. That is totally voluntary. And I'm telling you, journalism is not voluntary. I'm not saying it's not a noble profession. It has its place in our society. It's important in a free society. But please, let's not justify it by saying it doesn't exploit people. Of course it does. That's how they make their living. And so they sleep better at night. They say, well, it's for the public good. Well, let's be honest. 99% of the stories you read about or watch on television and the news, you don't need to know. You may want to know. It may be interesting, but you don't need to know it. 15 years ago or whatever, in the United States, there was this, you probably have heard about it, but maybe, there was this story about O.J. Simpson, who was an American football hero. Not the kind of football you have here, but, you know, American football. And, you know, and he murdered someone, and for 2 years, the trial, I mean, television news, newspapers were obsessed with this trial. Obsessed. All these great institutional newspapers, and they covered O.J. Simpson every single day. Now you tell me what the need to know about any of that was. The only people it affected in the world were the individual families. But the rest of the public, it was interesting and fascinating, but we didn't need to know. But newspapers and television stations made money, sold advertising, increased their ratings, because They talked about this story. So where's the higher ground here? You know, how are they closer to getting into heaven? Because they made money doing that. You want to talk exploitation? That's exploitation. And all I'm saying is, in a free society, you want the free media to reflect the entire society, not just good-looking, well-scrubbed, articulate, wealthy people, which at least in America, and my guess is, from what I know of British television, until recently, that's all it was. It was people that spoke the Queen's English, that looked good, that were very proper, and that's what you saw on television. And all of a sudden, television in the 90s started to show another side of society as well. And all of a sudden, we're offended. Like these people don't exist, like these issues don't happen. So let's stop the hypocrisy and just be honest about what the media does, what its role is, and recognize, which is the good news, that we are not deteriorating as a society. We're becoming more open, more honest, less hypocritical. There is a trend, there is a change that is going on, but it's not in human behavior. It's in the unstoppable, and I would say thankfully, unstoppable move and trend in the world toward democratization and liberalization. In the end, liberals always win. That does not mean that in various elections, conservatives won't win. It doesn't mean that from time to time that people like to give conservative speeches. Somehow you feel more grown up if you give a conservative speech. Well, I'm a businessman and I only do this, etc. And if you talk with a deeper voice, you seem like more of a grown up. But let me tell you, in the end, every major issue, in the end, over years, liberals win. We are far more liberal as a society, as a culture, than we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago. Every issue. You know, even now in America, I'll give you an example. When we started our show back in 1991, I did a show on interracial, in America, on interracial dating. There were protesters outside the studio. How can you have a subject, how can you do a subject like interracial dating? And then, 20 years later, we have a president who is the product of an interracial marriage. You tell me the culture hasn't become more liberal. We have gay marriage now. That was unthinkable 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Every issue, conservatives initially fight it, and in the end, the liberals win. In America, they fought Social Security. The conservatives did. And now it's unthinkable that Americans would not have Social Security. You obviously have it here in Great Britain. You know, we fought women's rights. Now we have women's rights. Conservatives fought against, on civil rights. Conservatives fought civil rights. Liberals fought for civil rights, and now, of course, as I said, we have an African-American president and made great progress. We're not there yet, but certainly much more equality than we had in racial behavior in America. Liberals, in the end, will always win. You can fight your conservative views, but a younger generation, I can even go to the most conservative neighborhoods in Britain. You give me your most conservative neighborhoods and find me the people your age, and I am telling you they are more liberal than their parents. You listen to the same music, go to the same movies. From time to time, you probably even smoke weed. You know what I mean? Who are we kidding? Give all the conservative speeches you want. You know you're more liberal. Your sexual lives are more liberal. Your attitude toward gays is more liberal. Your attitudes on race is more liberal. The world is becoming more liberal. Dictators are falling because technology now makes it possible to topple governments and dictatorship, because the people can talk to each other and organize on their own, raise money on their own, let the rest of the world know what's going on. And so all of a sudden, dictators that used to control information can't do it anymore. With a possible exception of North Korea, you know? I mean, virtually every dictator in the world is panicked. When is his or her time coming? Because they can't hold on anymore. Because of technology, communism fell. Because of technology, in 1989, within 3, 4, 5 months, the entire Iron Curtain fell. What do you think, just coincidentally everyone had the same idea at the same time? No. Because people in Poland could see what was happening in Czechoslovakia, or they could see and the people in Germany could see what was happening there. Everybody overnight suddenly saw on the internet what was happening, and they said, hey, if those people can do it, we can do it. The Arab Spring, the Ukraine. Now, I'm not saying that we don't have turbulence when this happens. I'm not saying that just because you have the masses suddenly with power, you're going to have great decisions made. The masses can make some horrible decisions. I'm not saying every problem in the world is done away with. What I am saying is every institution in our society, from religion to government to universities, you name it, every institution is suddenly being challenged because the masses have the technology to communicate upon themselves. So liberalism ultimately will win, democratization will ultimately take place. Our whole entertainment industry is now democratized. It used to be a bunch of people, at least in America, sitting in Hollywood or in New York deciding who our next stars are going to be. It's not like that anymore. Now the masses decide. You have Britain Got Talent, the X Factor, all this. What is that? It's regular people providing the entertainment. We, the audience, because of technology, have become the entertainment. We did it first through talk radio, where you would listen to talk radio and all of a sudden you'd be entertained by the callers. And then you had talk television, you'd be entertained by the audience. It was regular people being on television. And then that suddenly moved to the internet, and people would go to their chat rooms and young people would start having their own entertainment at night, just talking with each other. And then you had these television shows I'm talking about, where the audience become the entertainers. The audience votes on who the stars will be. It's democracy. You decide who your next stars are. And not all these people are more talented than the people that used to be our great singers. So I'm not saying that. Occasionally they're better. But I'm just saying it's the democratization of our culture. Obama never would have been president of the United States without the technology that we have. The Democratic Party, no political party in 2008 would have chosen an African American to be the candidate of the party. They wouldn't have believed that an African American could win. So he never would have been chosen. But because he could raise money and organize outside of the political structure by getting everyone on their cell phones, he raised more money than the party could. He had better organization than the party could get. And so he won the primaries, and suddenly he's president of the United States. Technology permitted that to happen. The liberalization, the democratization of our culture. Politics, show business, you name it. That is what is happening, not the deterioration of our behavior or our society, not the deterioration of our culture. What has happened is the unavoidable and unstoppable trend that human beings, if given the technology, if given the wherewithal, will always want to be free, will always not want to be told by institutions what they should do. Liberalism will always win in the end. You can fight it by being a conservative, but ultimately liberals will win. Thank you for having me. Any questions? Okay.